There is something inside you that has never been broken. Not diminished, not damaged, not lost, hidden. And the hiding was not accidental. What you are about to hear is not a philosophy. It is not a motivational framework. It is not another surface-level explanation of why your life isn't working the way you want it to. What you are about to encounter is the layer beneath all of that. The layer beneath every self-help book you've ever read, every manifestation technique you've ever tried, every moment you stood in front of a mirror and repeated affirmations into a reflection that didn't seem to be listening. That layer has been here the entire time, waiting. Not for you to try harder, not for you to want it more, not for you to find the right technique or the right teacher or the right sequence of steps, waiting for you to stop looking at the surface. Because here is what no one told you. What you have been calling your power is not your power. What you have been calling manifestation is not manifestation. What you have been calling your potential is the thinnest possible description of something so vast, so ancient, so structurally woven into the fabric of what you actually are, that the moment you see it clearly, the surface version will become unrecognizable to you. You were trained to stop at the surface, not by malice, not by conspiracy, by something far more pervasive than either of those things. You were trained by a world that only knows how to see the first layer. A world that hands you the thinnest slice of the truth and calls it the whole thing. A world that teaches you to want your power back without ever showing you where it actually lives. Today, we go beneath that. Today, the veil lifts. And I want you to understand something before we begin this descent together. The discomfort you may feel as we go deeper is not resistance. It is recognition. It is the feeling of something inside you that has always known there was more, finally being given permission to look at what it has always sensed was there. You have always known there was more beneath the surface. You were right. Let's start with what you think you know, because the surface version of this truth is everywhere. You have heard it. You have probably tried it. And if you are honest with yourself, you have probably felt the gap between what it promised and what it delivered. The surface version goes something like this. Your thoughts create your reality. Focus on what you want. Visualize, affirm, believe, and the universe will respond. Keep your vibration high. Think positive. Feel the feelings of already having what you desire, and reality will rearrange itself around your intention. You have heard this in some form or another, in some book or video or course or conversation. You have been handed this framework and told that this is the mechanism. This is how it works. This is the secret. And here is the thing, it is not wrong. The surface version is not a lie. It is just the surface. It is just the first layer of something that goes so much deeper that the surface description barely qualifies as a beginning. What most people do with the surface version is they try to operate it from the outside in. They try to manufacture the right thoughts. They try to force the right feelings. They try to perform the right behaviors. And then they wonder why the results are inconsistent. Why sometimes it seems to work, and other times it seems like the universe is simply not listening. Why the same technique that produced a result last month produces nothing this month. The surface version gives you a tool without showing you the mechanism beneath the tool. And when you don't understand the mechanism, you can't use the tool correctly. You end up doing the movements without accessing the power behind the movements. You end up going through the motions of manifestation while the actual force that makes manifestation possible sits dormant beneath everything you're doing. That dormant force is what we are here to find today. If this descent is resonating with you, if you can feel the layer we are moving toward, take a moment to like this video and subscribe so we can keep going deeper together. Now let's keep going. But there's a layer beneath the surface version, and that layer begins with a question that most people never ask. What actually is the thing that creates? Not the technique, not the method, not the practice. The actual generative force. The thing beneath the thought that makes the thought powerful. The thing beneath the feeling that makes the feeling magnetic. The thing beneath the word that makes the word a seed rather than just a sound. Because quantum mechanics found something beneath the surface of matter that should have answered this question decades ago. And it did answer it, in the language of physics. But most people stopped at the surface explanation of what quantum mechanics found and missed the layer beneath it that changes everything. Here is what is beneath the surface of matter. Not metaphorically, literally, physically, measurably. Matter is not solid. You know this on the surface level. You have probably heard it. Atoms are mostly empty space. The chair you are sitting in is more empty space than it is anything else. The surface of your skin is not a solid boundary, but a probabilistic cloud of quantum activity. You have heard this. You have probably nodded at it. But did you feel what it means? Because here is the layer beneath that fact. If matter is not solid, then what is it? Quantum mechanics has a precise answer. Before observation, before measurement, before a conscious system interacts with it, matter exists not as a thing, but as a superposition of all possible states simultaneously, a wave function, a spread of probabilities, every possible version of the thing existing at once, none of them collapsed into the specific, measurable, solid-seeming reality we experience. Until something observes it, until awareness touches it. And then, and only then, does the wave collapse into a single specific state. The infinite possibility narrows into the one particular thing that is now here, now measurable, now real in the way we think of real. The observer doesn't just see reality. The observer participates in the creation of reality. That is not philosophy. That is what quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter. That is what the double-slit experiment demonstrated. That is what the measurement problem in quantum physics points to. The act of observation, the act of awareness making contact with possibility, is not a passive act. It is a generative act. It is the mechanism by which the infinite field of what could be collapses into what is. Now, peel back that understanding and look at what's underneath. If the observer participates in the creation of what is observed, then the quality of the observer matters. Not just whether observation happens, but what kind of awareness is doing the observing. What frequency the observer is operating from. What the observer is holding in the field of their awareness when they make contact with the quantum field of possibility. This is the layer most people never reach. They hear that thoughts create reality, and they try to think better thoughts. But the thought is not the deepest mechanism. The thought is a surface expression of something much more fundamental. The thought is the wave on top of the water. What we are looking for is the current beneath the wave. That current has a name. It has been called many things across many traditions. But for our purposes today, let's call it what it actually is. It is your state of being, not your state of thinking, not your state of feeling, though feeling is closer to it. Your state of being. The fundamental frequency at which your awareness is operating before you have a thought, before you generate a feeling, before you speak a word or perform an action. The baseline vibrational signature of the consciousness that is doing the observing. Because if the observer participates in the collapse of quantum possibility into experienced reality, and the observer's fundamental state shapes what they observe, then the most powerful thing you can ever do is not change what you think. It is change what you are. At the level of being, at the level of the awareness itself. And this is where the ancient wisdom enters. Because the mystics mapped this hidden layer thousands of years before physicists found it with instruments. The ancient traditions did not call it a quantum field. They did not use the language of wave functions or superposition or observer effect, but they described the same mechanism with a precision that is breathtaking when you understand what they were actually pointing at. In the Vedic tradition, the concept of Brahman describes an underlying field of pure consciousness that is the substrate of all manifest reality. Not a god outside reality. Not a force separate from matter. The very ground of being from which all form arises. The infinite field of pure awareness that precedes and underlies everything that exists. And the individual self, the Atman, is not separate from this field. It is a focal point of it, a place where the infinite field of awareness becomes locally aware of itself. This is not metaphor. This is not poetry. This is a precise description of what quantum mechanics later found in the language of physics. The field of pure potentiality that underlies all manifest reality. The observer that participates in the collapse of possibility into form. The relationship between consciousness and the structure of what is real. In the Hermetic tradition, the principle of mentalism states that the all is mind, that the universe is mental, that what we call physical reality is a projection of consciousness rather than consciousness being a byproduct of physical reality, that the causative direction runs from awareness to matter, not from matter to awareness. Modern physics has been slowly, reluctantly, but unmistakably moving toward exactly this conclusion for over a century. In the Taoist tradition, the Tao is described as the nameless source from which all named things arise, the uncarved block of pure potential from which all specific forms are carved. And the practice of Taoism is not about forcing outcomes from the surface. It is about aligning with the Tao at the level of being, so that action arises from the deep nature of things rather than from the surface effort of the ego. In the Christian mystical tradition, the Gospel of John begins not with creation as an event, but with the Logos, the Word, the creative intelligence that precedes all form. And the teaching that the kingdom of heaven is within you is not a metaphor about being nice. It is a precise instruction about where the generative power lives, not outside you, not in the world of effects, within you, in the interior dimension, in the field of awareness that you are. Every tradition that has ever mapped the deep structure of reality has pointed to the same thing. The power to create is not a technique applied from the outside. It is a force that operates from the inside out, from the level of being, from the frequency of awareness itself. And you were trained to ignore it, not because anyone wanted to deprive you of it, but because the world that trained you only knows the surface layer. The world that shaped your understanding of yourself and your capabilities operates from the thinnest possible description of what you are. A body, a brain, a bundle of thoughts and feelings and behaviors, a self that has to work hard and try hard and push hard to produce results in a world that is fundamentally separate from you and fundamentally indifferent to your desires. That description is the surface. It is the first layer. It is the version of you that was handed to you by a world that had forgotten the depth. But there's a layer beneath that. And beneath that description of a self that is separate from reality and has to force its way through it, there is something that quantum mechanics confirmed and every ancient tradition mapped. A self that is not separate from the field of reality. A self that is, at its deepest level, a focal point of the same awareness that underlies all of existence. A self whose observation participates in the creation of what is observed. A self whose fundamental state of being shapes the quantum field from which experience arises. That self is not something you have to become. It is what you already are beneath the layers of conditioning that taught you to see yourself as smaller. Let me show you something about how that training happened. Because this is important. This is the layer that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. From the moment you were born, you were being calibrated, not by malicious design, by the natural process of a consciousness learning to navigate a world that is described to it by other consciousnesses who are themselves operating from the surface layer. You were taught through 1,000 subtle repetitions that the world is something that happens to you. that reality is something external and fixed that you move through. That your job is to respond to circumstances rather than to generate them. That power is something you acquire from outside yourself, through achievement, through approval, through accumulation. Every time you were rewarded for performing correctly and punished for performing incorrectly, you learned that the source of your well-being was external. Every time you were told that your feelings were inappropriate and needed to be managed, you learned to distrust the interior signals that connect you to the deeper field. Every time you were handed a surface-level explanation for how reality works and told not to look further, you learned that the surface is where you live. And here is the consequence of that training. The consequence is not that you lost your power. You cannot lose what you are at the level of being. The consequence is that you learned to operate from a level of awareness that is above the level where the power actually lives. You learn to work with thoughts and feelings and behaviors and techniques, while the actual generative force sat dormant beneath all of it, untouched, waiting. The training did not take your power. It taught you to look in the wrong direction for it. Now let's go deeper. Because the question that emerges from this understanding is the most important question you can ask. If the power lives at the level of being rather than the level of technique, how do you access the level of being? How do you get beneath the thoughts and feelings and behaviors and performances to the place where the actual creative force operates? And this is where the ancient wisdom becomes not just interesting, but essential. Because the traditions that mapped the deep structure of reality did not just describe the power, they described the practices through which awareness descends from the surface level to the generative level. They described the pathway from the thin outer layer to the deep interior, where creation actually happens. And those pathways are not complicated. They are not esoteric. They are not available only to initiates or monks or people who have spent decades in retreat. They are available to you right now, in the life you are already living, in the body you already inhabit, in this moment. But before we get to the practice, I want to tell you about Miriam. Miriam was a woman who had spent years doing everything right. She had read the books, she had done the visualizations, she had written the affirmations, she had attended the workshops and listened to the teachers, and followed the instructions with genuine dedication. And there were moments scattered through those years when something seemed to click, when a desire materialized with surprising ease, when the universe seemed to lean in and cooperate with her intentions. But those moments were inconsistent. They came and went without her being able to understand why. She could not replicate them reliably. She could not find the pattern that determined when the power was accessible and when it wasn't. And the inconsistency was more frustrating than simple failure would have been, because the moments of success confirmed that something real was there. They just couldn't tell her where it lived. One afternoon, Miriam was sitting by a river, not doing anything in particular. Not visualizing, not affirming, not trying, just sitting. And she noticed something she had never noticed before. The river did not try to flow. The current did not make an effort to move downstream. The water did not visualize its destination or affirm its arrival. It simply expressed its nature completely, without resistance, without performance, without the gap between what it was and what it was trying to become. And in that moment, something shifted in Miriam. Not a thought, something deeper than a thought. A recognition at the level of being. A felt sense of what it would mean to be like the river. Not to try to be powerful, not to perform power, but to simply be the expression of what she already was at the deepest level, to let the current that was already moving within her move without the obstruction of her surface level trying. She didn't do anything different that afternoon. She didn't set a new intention or practice a new technique. She simply sat with that recognition and let it settle into her. And in the weeks that followed, the inconsistency began to resolve, not because she had found a better technique, because she had found the level beneath technique. She had touched, however briefly, the place where the power actually lived. And having touched it once, clearly, she could find her way back to it. What Miriam discovered by the river is what the ancient traditions call different things in different languages. The Taoists call it Wu Wei, effortless action, action that arises from alignment with the deep nature of things rather than from surface effort. The Vedic tradition calls it Sahaja, the natural state, the expression of what you are, rather than the performance of what you think you should be. The Christian mystics call it surrender, not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of the surface self to the deeper self. The release of the ego's grip on the controls so that the deeper intelligence can move through you. All of them are pointing at the same thing, the layer beneath technique, the place where the power actually lives. And here is what quantum mechanics adds to this ancient map. The reason that effortless alignment is more powerful than effortful technique is not mystical, it is structural. When you are in a state of effortless alignment, when your surface self has released its grip and your awareness has settled into the deeper level of being, you are operating from the same frequency as the quantum field itself. You are not separate from the field, trying to influence it from the outside. You are an expression of the field, and the field responds to you the way a river responds to a stone dropped into it. Not because you forced a response, but because contact between two aspects of the same thing naturally produces resonance. When you are operating from the surface level, from the level of effortful technique and manufactured feeling and performed belief, you are essentially trying to reach into the quantum field from outside it. You are trying to influence the mechanism from above the level where the mechanism operates. And this is why the results are inconsistent. You occasionally touch the deeper level accidentally, in moments of genuine feeling or genuine certainty, and those are the moments when things seem to work effortlessly. But you cannot sustain that contact from the surface level. You cannot force your way to the depth. The only way to the depth is down, and down means releasing the surface, not destroying it, not abandoning it, but releasing your identification with it as the totality of what you are. Recognizing that beneath the thoughts and feelings and behaviors and techniques, there is a level of awareness that is not trying to create reality, that is participating in its creation simply by being what it is. That awareness is what we are going to practice finding. But first, let's go one layer deeper into what it actually is. Because this is the layer that most people never reach, and it is the layer that changes everything. Here is the thing about your awareness. The awareness that is reading these words right now, the awareness that is listening to this transmission, the awareness that is noticing the thoughts arising in response to what is being said. That awareness is not a product of your brain. That is the surface level explanation. That is the first layer of the description that the materialist worldview hands you. The layer beneath that explanation is something that quantum mechanics has been pointing toward for over a century, and that the ancient traditions described with remarkable precision long before physics existed. Your awareness is not generated by matter. Your awareness is the field within which matter arises. This is not a belief. This is the logical conclusion of what quantum mechanics found when it discovered that the observer participates in the creation of what is observed. If matter requires observation to collapse from possibility into actuality, then awareness is not a byproduct of the material world. Awareness is the precondition for the material world. Awareness is what the material world arises within. The ancient Vedic concept of Chit, pure consciousness, describes exactly this. Not consciousness as a thing that brains produce, but consciousness as the ground of being within which all things, including brains, arise. The Upanishads describe this with a precision that is extraordinary. The self is not in the world is in the self. This is the layer that changes everything, because if your awareness is not a product of the material world, but the field within which the material world arises, then you are not a small thing trying to influence a large external reality. You are the awareness that the entire field of experience is arising within. You are not separate from the quantum field of possibility. You are the observing consciousness that participates in its collapse into specific experienced reality. And the training you received, the training that taught you to see yourself as a small separate self in a large external world, was training that obscured this fundamental truth about what you are. It was training that took the deepest layer of your identity and covered it with a surface description so thin and so limiting that the actual power beneath it became inaccessible. That is what we are lifting the veil on today. Not just the surface truth that your thoughts create your reality, the deeper truth that your awareness is the field within which reality arises, the even deeper truth that the quality and frequency of your awareness, your fundamental state of being, is the actual generative mechanism beneath all the techniques and methods and practices you have ever tried. Now let's go to the practice, because this is not an intellectual exercise. This is an experiential transmission. And the only way to verify what I am describing is to go to the level where it operates and feel it directly. I want you to do something right now, not later. Now. Stop reading or listening with the part of your mind that is evaluating and analyzing and categorizing what is being said, just for a moment, just long enough to try something. Become aware of the awareness that is reading these words, not the words, not the thoughts about the words, not the feelings arising in response to the words, the awareness within which all of that is happening, the silent, still presence that is noticing all of it. Can you find it? It is not a thought. You cannot think your way to it. Every time you think about it, you are still at the surface level. What you are looking for is beneath the thinking. It is the space within which the thinking arises. There is a simple way to find it. Notice that you are aware. Not what you are aware of, just the fact of awareness itself. The bare, simple, undeniable fact that there is awareness happening right now. Something is noticing. Something is present. Something is here. That something, that awareness, that presence, that is the level we are talking about. And notice something about it. Notice that it is not anxious. Notice that it is not desperate. Notice that it is not trying to be anything other than what it is. Notice that it does not have a problem. Notice that it is not lacking anything. Notice that it is simply here, present, open, complete. This is not a manufactured state. You did not create this awareness through technique. It was already here. It has always been here. Beneath every thought you have ever had, beneath every feeling you have ever felt, beneath every performance and effort and struggle. This awareness has been here, unchanged, untouched, undimmed. This is the level at which the power operates. This is the frequency that the quantum field responds to, not the frequency of your anxious wanting, not the frequency of your desperate trying, not the frequency of your performed positivity. The frequency of this, the aware presence that you are beneath all of that. The simple, still, complete awareness that has been here the entire time, waiting for you to stop looking at the surface long enough to notice it. This is what the ancient traditions were pointing to when they described the inner kingdom. This is what the mystics were describing when they spoke of the peace that passes understanding. This is what the Vedic tradition means by the Atman, the true self that is identical in nature to the Brahman, the ground of all being. And this is what quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of matter, not a mechanism separate from consciousness, a field that is, at its deepest level, participatory, a field that responds to the quality of the awareness that contacts it. When you operate from this level, from the level of the aware presence that you are beneath all the surface activity, the mechanism of creation changes completely. You are no longer trying to force the quantum field to respond to your surface level desires. You are operating from within the field itself. You are the field becoming aware of a specific possibility. And the collapse from possibility to actuality happens not through effort but through the natural resonance between your awareness and the frequency of what you are holding in that awareness. This is why the ancient traditions speak of manifestation as remembering rather than achieving, as allowing rather than forcing, as being rather than doing. Not because effort is bad, but because the deepest level of creative power operates below the level where effort lives. It operates at the level of being, and being is not something you do. It is something you allow yourself to return to. You are trained to stay at the surface. You are trained to keep your attention on the thoughts and feelings and behaviors and performances at the surface level. You were trained to believe that the surface level is where the power lives. It isn't. The power lives here, in this awareness, in this presence, in this frequency of being that has been beneath everything you have ever experienced, waiting for you to look deep enough to find it. Now let's go one more layer deeper, because there is something beneath even this that needs to be named. The awareness we just found, the simple, present awareness beneath all the surface activity, is not just your individual awareness. This is the layer that the ancient traditions were most insistent about, and that quantum mechanics most provocatively suggests. The individual awareness is not separate from the field of awareness that underlies all of reality. The boundary between your awareness and the quantum field of possibility is not a solid wall. It is, to use the language of this transmission, a veil, a membrane, a thin surface that feels solid from the surface level but dissolves the moment you look at it from the depth level. The Vedic tradition's most radical claim is this: Atman is Brahman. The individual self is the universal self. The focal point of awareness that you call I is not separate from the infinite field of awareness that underlies all of existence. It is a local expression of it. The way a wave is a local expression of the ocean, not separate from the ocean, not independent of the ocean. A shape that the ocean is taking in this particular location. The mystic Meister Eckhart said it this way: "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. The awareness through which you perceive reality is the same awareness through which reality perceives itself. There is not your awareness on one side and the universe on the other. There is one field of awareness, expressing itself in infinite local focal points, each of which is a being like you. And if this is true, if the boundary between your individual awareness and the quantum field of possibility is a membrane rather than a wall, then the implications for what you are capable of are staggering. Because it means that when you operate from the level of the aware presence, that you are beneath all the surface activity, you are not a small self trying to influence a large external reality. You are the field itself, locally aware, locally experiencing, locally creating. You are the universe looking at itself through this particular set of eyes. You are the infinite creative intelligence expressing itself through this particular form. And the power that is available at that level is not the power of a small self trying to manipulate circumstances. It is the power of the field itself, moving through the clear channel of an awareness that has released its identification with the surface layer and returned to its deeper nature. This is what the traditions mean when they speak of God-given power, not power given to you by an external deity, power that is intrinsic to what you are at the deepest level, power that is not something you acquire but something you remember, power that has never been absent, only obscured by the layers of conditioning that taught you to see yourself as smaller than you are. Let me tell you about a man named Elias. Elias had spent his entire adult life feeling like he was missing something. Not materially. He had enough. He had the things that the surface world said should produce satisfaction. But beneath the surface of his life, beneath the routine and the accomplishments and the relationships and the possessions, there was a persistent sense of incompleteness, a feeling that he was operating at a fraction of what he was capable of, a sense of distance between the life he was living and the life that felt possible somehow, somewhere, in a direction he couldn't quite identify. He had tried many things to close that distance. He had tried ambition. He had tried achievement. He had tried relationships. He had tried substances. He had tried therapy. He had tried spirituality in its surface forms, the rituals and the affirmations and the vision boards and the workshops. None of it closed the distance, because the distance was not between him and something he needed to acquire. The distance was between the surface level of himself and the depth level of himself. The distance was between the layer he had been trained to inhabit and the layer where he actually lived. The distance was between the thin outer crust of his identity and the infinite interior that had been waiting beneath it for his entire life. The moment of shift for Elias came not through a dramatic revelation, but through a small, quiet, almost unremarkable experience. He was sitting in a garden in the early morning, before the day had fully begun, before the noise of the surface world had started up again. And he noticed, as Miriam had noticed by the river, that the garden was not trying. The roses were not efforting their way into bloom. The light was not straining to illuminate the leaves. The whole scene was simply expressing its nature, completely, without gap, without distance between what it was and what it was trying to become. And he felt, in that moment, the layer beneath his own surface, the awareness that had been here the entire time, beneath all the trying and the seeking and the straining towards something he couldn't name, the simple, present, complete awareness that was not lacking anything, that was not at a distance from anything, that was simply here in this garden, in this morning, in this moment, as full and as real as the roses and the light. He did not achieve anything in that moment. He did not manifest anything. He did not accomplish anything. He simply stopped for a moment, being at the surface. And in that stopping, in that dropping down into the depth of what he actually was, something shifted in the field of his experience, that no amount of surface-level effort had ever been able to shift. The weeks and months that followed were not dramatic. They were not filled with miraculous manifestations or sudden reversals of fortune. They were filled with something quieter and more fundamental than either of those things. They were filled with a growing sense of alignment. A growing sense that the distance he had felt his entire life was closing, not because the world was changing around him, though it was, but because he was changing at the level of being. He was operating from a deeper layer. He was living from the frequency of the aware presence rather than from the frequency of the surface performance. And from that frequency, things that had seemed impossible from the surface level became not just possible, but natural. Not because he had found a better technique, because he had found the level beneath technique, the level where the power actually lives. This is what was hidden from you. This is the layer beneath the surface version of manifestation that you have been handed. This is the God-given power that the training of the surface world taught you to ignore. Not a power you have to acquire, a power you have to remember. Not a technique you have to master, a frequency you have to return to. Not something outside you that you have to attract. Something inside you at the deepest level of what you are that you have to stop covering with the noise of the surface layer. Now let's talk about what that return actually looks like in practice. Because this is not just a philosophical position. This is a lived experience. And the path from the surface layer to the depth layer is not a path of dramatic transformation. It is a path of progressive recognition. A path of peeling back, layer by layer, the conditioning that has been covering the depth until what was always there is accessible again. The first layer to peel back is the belief that effort is the primary mechanism of creation. This is perhaps the most deeply conditioned belief in the modern world. The belief that more effort produces more results. That pushing harder is the way to the life you want. That the gap between where you are and where you want to be is a gap that can only be closed through work, through striving, through the application of more surface-level force. This belief is not entirely wrong. Effort has its place. Action has its place. But when effort is the primary mechanism you are relying on, you are operating from the surface layer. You are trying to produce results from above the level where the actual generative force operates, and you will get inconsistent results. You will get results that require constant maintenance. You will get results that exhaust you, because you are doing all the work that the field would do for you if you would only let it. The ancient principle of Wu Wei, which I mentioned earlier, is not a principle of passivity. It is a principle of alignment. Act, yes, but let the action arise from the deep nature of things rather than from the surface urgency of the ego. Let the action be the expression of what you are rather than the performance of what you think you should be. Let the doing arise from the being rather than trying to use the doing to create the being. When you operate from this principle, your action becomes exponentially more effective, not because you are doing more, but because you are doing from the right level, because your action is aligned with the field rather than struggling against it. Because the force behind your action is not just your individual will, but the creative intelligence of the field itself, moving through you as a clear channel. The second layer to peel back is the belief that your desires are separate from you. The belief that what you want is something outside you that you have to attract from the field of external reality. This belief keeps you in the posture of lack. It keeps you operating from the frequency of wanting, which is a frequency that is incompatible with the frequency of having, and therefore incompatible with the frequency of creation. The layer beneath this belief is something that the ancient traditions described with remarkable consistency. Your desires are not random wishes arising from a separate self. They are the field's own movement toward expression through you. They are the creative intelligence of the universe becoming locally aware of a specific possibility and moving toward its manifestation through the particular focal point of awareness that you are. When you feel a genuine desire, a deep, authentic longing for something, that is not the small surface self wanting something it doesn't have. That is the field itself, expressing through you, moving toward a specific form of expression. The desire is the beginning of the manifestation. It is the creative intelligence of the field identifying a possibility and beginning the movement toward its realization. This is why the ancient traditions speak of desire as sacred, not as something to be suppressed or transcended, but as something to be honored and aligned with. Because genuine desire that arises from the depth rather than from the surface ego, is the field speaking through you. It is the universe identifying, through your particular awareness, a form it wants to take. The problem is not desire. The problem is the layer of anxiety and urgency and grasping that gets added to desire at the surface level. The problem is when the field's natural movement toward expression gets filtered through the surface ego's belief in lack and limitation and struggle. When that happens, the frequency of the desire gets distorted. It gets mixed with the frequency of not having, of needing, of desperate wanting. And that mixed frequency is not coherent. It is not aligned with the field. It produces inconsistent results. The practice is to feel the desire from the depth level rather than the surface level, to feel it as the field's own movement rather than the ego's grasping, to hold it with the certainty of the aware presence rather than the anxiety of the surface self, to know it as already true at the level of the field, already real at the level of possibility, already moving toward expression through you, rather than as something you need to force into existence through effort. This is the difference between manifestation from the surface and creation from the depth. Surface manifestation is effortful, anxious, inconsistent. Deep creation is natural, aligned, inevitable. Not because you are doing something better, because you are being something deeper. The third layer to peel back is perhaps the most subtle and perhaps the most important. It is the belief that you are the surface self at all. The belief that the thoughts and feelings and behaviors and performances and histories and stories that make up your surface identity are what you actually are. This is the deepest layer of conditioning, and it is the one that, when it dissolves, reveals the most profound level of what you are capable of. Because if you are the surface self, the collection of thoughts and feelings and behaviors and histories, then your creative power is limited by the history of that self. It is limited by the patterns and the conditioning and the wounds and the beliefs that have accumulated in that surface self over the course of your life. And no amount of technique can fully override those limitations, because the technique is being applied by the same surface self that has the limitations. But if you are the aware presence beneath the surface self, if you are the field of consciousness within which the surface self arises, then your creative power is not limited by the history of the surface self. It is the power of the field itself. It is the power of the awareness that underlies all of reality. It is the God-given power that the traditions have been pointing to for thousands of years. And the surface self, the thoughts and feelings and behaviors and histories, becomes not the totality of what you are, but the instrument through which the deeper self expresses itself, the vehicle, the form, the particular shape that the infinite field is taking in this location, in this moment, in this life. When you identify with the aware presence rather than the surface self, everything changes. Not because the surface self disappears, it doesn't. Not because the thoughts and feelings and behaviors and histories go away, they don't. But they are no longer the ground of your identity. They are no longer the level from which you are operating. They are surface expressions of something deeper. And you are the something deeper. From that identification, from that recognition of yourself as the aware presence rather than the surface self, the creative power that the traditions describe becomes not a distant possibility, but an immediate lived reality. Because you are no longer a small self trying to influence a large external reality. You are the awareness within which the entire field of experience is arising. And the field responds to you not as an external force that you are trying to manipulate, but as an expression of the same awareness that you are. This is the veil that lifts. This is the layer beneath all the layers. This is what was always there, waiting for your awareness to be ready to see it. You are not a surface self trying to access a deeper power. You are the deeper power, temporarily identified with a surface self. And the moment you recognize this, the moment you feel it, not just understand it intellectually, but feel it at the level of being, the mechanism of creation shifts completely. The effort drops away. The anxiety drops away. The desperate wanting drops away. What remains is the natural creative expression of the aware presence that you are. The field moving through you. The universe creating through this particular focal point of its own awareness. This is what was hidden. This is what the training covered. This is what the surface world does not know how to show you because it does not know how to see it itself. But you are seeing it now, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. Let's talk about what this means for the specific things you want to create in your life, because this is not an abstract philosophical teaching, This is a practical description of how the mechanism actually works. And once you understand the mechanism at this level, the practice of creation becomes something entirely different from what you may have been doing. When you want to create something in your life, whether it is a relationship or a material condition or a state of health or a quality of experience, the surface approach is to focus on the thing you want and try to attract it or force it into existence through technique and effort and the right combination of thoughts and feelings and behaviors. The deep approach is different. The deep approach begins not with the thing you want, but with the level of being from which you are creating. It begins with the return to the aware presence, the dropping down from the surface layer to the depth layer, the recognition of yourself as the field rather than as the surface self. From that level, you do not want the thing. You know it, not with the intellectual knowledge of the surface mind, with the knowing of the aware presence, the same knowing with which you know that you exist, the same knowing with which you know that you are aware, a knowing that does not require evidence because it operates at the level beneath evidence, at the level of being itself. This is what the ancient traditions call faith, not belief in the absence of evidence, knowing at the level of being, the certainty of the aware presence, which does not depend on the surface world's confirmation, because it operates from a level deeper than the surface world. When you hold a desire from this level, when you know it with the knowing of the aware presence, rather than wanting it with the anxiety of the surface self, the field responds not to your wanting, but to your knowing. It responds not to the frequency of lack, but to the frequency of completion. And it moves, with the natural inevitability of water finding its level, toward the expression of what you know. This is the mechanism. This is what was hidden beneath the surface version. This is the layer that the ancient traditions mapped and that quantum mechanics confirmed and that your training covered. And the practice is not complicated, but it is not easy, because it requires something that the surface world does not train you for. It requires the willingness to release your identification with the surface self, to stop defending the surface story about who you are and what is possible for you, to let the surface layer be what it is, a thin outer crust over something infinite, rather than the totality of what you are. This is what the traditions call surrender, not the surrender of defeat, the surrender of the surface to the depth, the release of the ego's grip on the controls, the willingness to let the deeper intelligence move through you, rather than insisting that the surface self is the one in charge. And here is the extraordinary thing about that surrender. When the surface self releases its grip and the aware presence is allowed to operate as the primary level of identity, the surface self does not disappear. It does not cease to function. It becomes more functional, not less. Because it is no longer trying to do the work that the field would do. It is no longer straining against the natural current of things. It is no longer performing power from a level that is above the level where the power lives. It is the expression of the power, the vehicle, the form through which the creative intelligence of the field expresses itself in this particular location. The thoughts become clearer. The feelings become more aligned. The actions become more effective. The words become more resonant. Not because you are trying harder, because you are operating from the right level, because the tool is now connected to the source of its power. This is what you were trained to ignore, not because anyone wanted to take it from you, but because the world that trained you is itself operating from the surface layer and does not know what it is covering. Now you know. And knowing changes everything. Not the intellectual knowledge of having heard this, the embodied recognition of having felt it. The moment you touched the aware presence during the practice earlier in this transmission, that was not a small thing. That was a contact with the level where the power lives. And every time you make that contact, every time you return to that level, every time you release the surface layer's grip and drop into the depth, the connection becomes stronger, the channel becomes clearer, the creative power becomes more accessible. This is a practice, not a one-time revelation, a practice of returning again and again from the surface to the depth, from the noise to the silence, from the performance to the presence, from the surface self to the aware presence, from the thin outer layer to the infinite interior, and each return deepens the recognition. Each contact with the depth makes the next contact easier. Each moment of operating from the level of being rather than the level of technique makes the mechanism more natural, more available, more integrated into the texture of your daily life. Until, eventually, the return is not a special practice. It is the baseline. The depth is where you live. The surface is where you visit. The aware presence is your primary identity. The surface self is your instrument. And the creative power that was always there, always available, always waiting beneath the layers of conditioning, is simply what you are. This is the trajectory. This is the direction of the path. This is what the ancient traditions were describing and what quantum mechanics confirms and what your own deepest knowing has always sensed was possible. You were trained to ignore it. But the training was not permanent. The conditioning was not the truth. The surface layer was not the whole story. And you are here, in this moment, having descended through the layers, having touched the depth, having felt what lives beneath everything you were taught to see as the totality of what you are, that cannot be taken back. What has been revealed cannot be re-hidden. Let's talk about the specific practices through which this return to depth becomes a reliable, daily, integrated way of living. Because the recognition is the beginning. The practice is what makes it permanent. The first practice is what I will call the depth check. Several times throughout your day, not in special moments set aside for spiritual practice, but in the ordinary moments of your ordinary life. Pause. Not for long. A breath. A moment. And ask yourself this question. Which level am I operating from right now? Am I at the surface, in the thoughts and feelings and performances and reactions? Or am I at the depth, in the aware presence beneath all of that? You do not need to force a shift. The asking of the question is itself a movement toward the depth, because the aware presence is the one asking the question. The surface self is the one being asked about, and the moment you make that distinction, the moment you feel the difference between the asker and the asked about, you have touched the depth level. Do this throughout the day, not as a discipline, as a remembering, a gentle, repeated remembering of what you are beneath what you are performing. The second practice is what the traditions call sacred silence, not the absence of sound, the presence of the depth beneath sound. This is the practice of sitting daily in the aware presence. Not meditating in the sense of trying to achieve a particular state, simply being the aware presence. Noticing that you are aware, resting in that noticing, letting the surface activity of thoughts and feelings and sensations arise and pass, without grabbing onto them, without pushing them away, without identifying with them as what you are. 5 minutes of this is more powerful than an hour of surface-level technique. Because you are not practicing a technique. You are practicing being what you are. You are practicing the frequency from which all genuine creation arises. The third practice is what I will call desire from depth. When you notice a genuine desire, a deep authentic longing for something, do not immediately begin the surface level work of visualizing and affirming and trying to attract it. First, drop to the depth level. Find the aware presence. Settle into the frequency of the field, and from that level, feel the desire, not as the surface self's wanting, as the field's own movement toward expression through you. Feel it as already true at the level of the field, already real at the level of possibility, already in motion toward its expression through your particular focal point of awareness, not because you are forcing a feeling of having it, because you are operating from the level where it already exists as possibility, and the collapse from possibility to actuality is not a distant future event, but a natural movement that is already underway. Hold it with the quiet certainty of the aware presence, not the desperate wanting of the surface self, the knowing of the depth, the faith of the field, the certainty of the creative intelligence that has never failed to express itself through clear channels. And then let the action arise. Let the movement arise. Let the surface self do its part. The thinking and planning and doing and speaking and engaging, but let it arise from the depth level rather than driving from the surface level. Let the action be the expression of the knowing rather than the attempt to create the knowing through action. This is the inversion that changes everything. In the surface approach, you try to create the feeling of having through action. In the deep approach, you operate from the knowing of having and let the action arise from that. The surface approach is exhausting and inconsistent. The deep approach is natural and inevitable. The fourth practice is what I will call the veil practice. This is a practice of perception, of learning to see the depth beneath the surface of ordinary experience. Look at something ordinary around you right now. A wall, a table, a window. Whatever is in your field of vision, look at it with the surface eyes first. Solid, fixed, definite. There. Now remember what quantum mechanics found beneath the surface of that thing. That the apparent solidity is a surface appearance over a quantum reality in which the atoms that make up that surface are mostly empty space, in which the subatomic particles that make up those atoms exist between observations as probability waves rather than definite things, in which the apparent fixity is a surface stability over a quantum flux of probability and possibility. Feel what shifts when you see the depth beneath the surface of that ordinary thing. Feel the aliveness of it. Feel the participation of your awareness in the stability of its appearance. Feel the quantum reality beneath the solid surface. And then turn that same perception on yourself, on the body you inhabit, on the thoughts arising in your mind, on the feelings moving through your field. See the depth beneath the surface of your own experience. See the aware presence beneath the thoughts. See the field of possibility beneath the apparent fixity of your identity and your circumstances. This practice done regularly shifts your baseline perception. It trains your awareness to operate from the depth level rather than the surface level. It makes the quantum reality of your own nature not an abstract concept, but a lived experience. And from that lived experience, the creative power that is intrinsic to the aware presence becomes not a distant possibility, but an immediate availability. You are not separate from the field. You are the field, locally aware. And the moment you live from that recognition, everything changes. There is one more layer to lift before we close this transmission. One more layer beneath everything we have covered, and it is perhaps the most important layer of all. Everything we have discussed, the quantum field, the aware presence, the depth beneath the surface, the creative power of the observer, all of it has been pointing toward a single recognition. And that recognition is this: you are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are the spiritual reality having a human experience. The body is not what you are. It is what you are wearing. The mind is not what you are. It is what you are using. The history is not what you are. It is what you have moved through. The circumstances are not what you are. They are what you are currently expressing through. What you are is the aware presence, the field of consciousness, the focal point of the infinite creative intelligence of the universe, the place where the infinite becomes local, where the formless takes form, where the unlimited expresses itself in the particular. And that is not a small thing. That is not a humble thing. That is the most extraordinary thing that can be said about any being. You are the universe, locally aware. You are the creative intelligence of the field, expressed in this particular form, at this particular location, in this particular moment. And the power that flows from that recognition is not something you have to acquire or develop or deserve. It is what you are. It is the natural expression of the aware presence that you are when the surface layer is not obscuring it. This is the God-given power, not given by an external deity to a separate self, intrinsic to the nature of what you are, built into the structure of your being at the most fundamental level, present always, available always, waiting always for the moment when the surface layer releases enough for the depth to be accessible. That moment is now, not because you have done something to earn it, not because you have achieved the right level of understanding or the right frequency of vibration or the right combination of practices, because you are here in this moment, having descended through the layers, having touched the depth, having felt what lives beneath the surface of everything you were trained to see as the totality of what you are. You are ready. You have always been ready. The readiness was not something you had to develop. It was something you had to remember. And now you remember. What does this mean for the life you are living? What does it mean for the things you want to create? What does it mean for the circumstances you want to change? What does it mean for the relationships you want to build, the health you want to experience, the abundance you want to express? It means that none of those things are as far from you as the surface layer made them appear. Because the distance between where you are and where you want to be is not a distance in the external world. It is a distance between the level you have been operating from and the level where the power lives. And that distance is not measured in time or effort or achievement. It is measured in depth, in the willingness to drop from the surface to the depth, from the performance to the presence, from the wanting to the knowing. And you know how to drop now. You have felt the depth. You have touched the aware presence. You have made contact with the level where the power lives. And every time you make that contact, the creative intelligence of the field moves through you more clearly. The mechanism operates more naturally. The results arise with less effort and more certainty, not because you have found a better technique, because you have found the level beneath technique, the level where the power actually lives, the level that was always there, always available, always waiting for your awareness to be ready to see it. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you can see through it. I want to ask you something. In this transmission, in the descent through these layers, was there a moment when something shifted? A moment when you felt the depth beneath the surface? A moment when the aware presence was not just an idea, but a felt reality? A moment when the recognition landed not in your mind, but in your being? If there was, I want you to name it, not to perform it, not to prove it, but to anchor it, to make it real in the world of words and language and shared experience, to bring the depth level recognition into the surface level of communication and let it take root there. In the comments, tell us, what layer did you reach? What veil lifted? What did you find beneath the surface of what you thought you knew? Was there a moment in your own life when you saw through an illusion you had been living inside, a truth that was hidden in plain sight until you were ready to see it? Share that moment below, because the depth is recognized between those who have touched it, and your words may be the permission someone else needs to look deeper. Because this is not a solitary journey. The recognition of the depth is not something that happens in isolation. It happens in community, in the resonance between aware presences who have touched the same depth and recognize each other from that level, in the shared language of those who have stopped being surface dwellers and begun living from the depth. You are one of those. You have been one of those. You just hadn't been shown the layer you were already living from. Now you have been shown. And the community of those who see the depth, who refuse to stop at the surface, who know that what they see is never all there is, that community is here. In this transmission, in every person who has descended through these layers and touched what lives beneath them, in every awareness that has recognized itself as the field rather than the surface. You are not alone in this recognition. You never were. Let me close with this, with the integration principle that holds all of these layers together. The surface world will continue to present itself as the totality of reality. The thoughts will continue to arise. The feelings will continue to move through you. The circumstances will continue to be what they are. The people around you will continue to operate from the surface layer, not because they are wrong, but because they haven't yet been shown the depth. None of that changes. And none of that needs to change in order for you to operate from the depth level. Because the depth level is not an escape from the surface. It is the ground beneath the surface. It is the aware presence within which the surface arises. And you can be the depth level while fully engaging with the surface level. You can be the aware presence while thinking thoughts and feeling feelings and taking actions and living the ordinary texture of your ordinary life. The integration is not the replacement of the surface with the depth. It is the recognition of the depth as the ground of the surface. The recognition that the surface arises within the depth, not the other way around. That the thoughts arise within the aware presence, not the other way around. That the circumstances arise within the field of consciousness, not the other way around. From that recognition, the surface becomes not a prison, but a playground. Not a fixed reality you are trapped in, but a fluid expression of the field you are operating from. Not the totality of what is real, but the current expression of what the field is creating through this particular focal point of awareness. And you, as that focal point, as the aware presence, expressing itself through this particular form in this particular moment, have the creative power that the ancient traditions described, and that quantum mechanics confirmed, and that your training covered. You have it now, not because this transmission gave it to you, because this transmission helped you remember where it was, beneath the surface, beneath the conditioning, beneath the layers of a world that only knows how to see the first layer. It was always there. It has always been there. It will always be there. Because it is what you are. You are no longer a surface dweller. You see the depth now. You feel the depth now. You know, at the level of being rather than the level of belief, that what you see is never all there is. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. The veil has lifted. What has been revealed cannot be re-hidden, and the power that was always yours, the awareness that is the ground of all things, the creative intelligence that the field expresses through clear channels, through you, through this particular focal point of the infinite, is available. Now, in this moment, in every moment that follows, not as something to be achieved, as something to be lived, as the natural expression of the depth that you are, as the inevitable creation of the aware presence operating from the level where the power lives. Go there, stay there, return there every time the surface pulls you back up, and from there, create. Not with the effort of the surface self, with the knowing of the depth, with the certainty of the aware presence, with the natural creative expression of the field moving through a clear channel. This is the hidden law. This is the God-given power. This is what was always beneath the surface of everything you were taught to see as the totality of what you are. Now you see it. Now you are it. And nothing will ever look quite the same again. If someone in your life is ready to stop living at the surface, to feel what lives beneath the noise and the performance and the surface story they have been handed, share this with them. When two awareness fields descend into the depth together, something opens between them that neither could reach alone. The veil lifts faster. The recognition runs deeper. And the collective ability to see beneath the surface of reality grows stronger in ways that neither individual could generate on their own. This transmission is also worth returning to in a quiet moment, early morning before the day begins, or in the stillness before sleep, when the surface noise is lowest and the deeper layers are most accessible. What you hear at the depth the second time will not be the same as what you heard the first. There is a layer of reality that most people are not even aware they are missing, and the quantum field has been trying to communicate it to you directly. The video on the quantum field and what it wants to tell you goes even further into how that communication works, what frequency it operates on, and why learning to receive it changes everything about how creation moves through you.